thing you were supposed to see was when the blade cuts through in an
Oh,
amazing
right.
when the propeller cuts through the middle of
The
the
plane.
blade and splits Cyrus and Nicolas Cage up. I think he was supposed to be killed in that shot. I'm not exactly sure, but as I remember, I'm pretty sure that's the last shot you see of him. And then they decided, no, it has to be another ending. And so literally they went back to Vegas and faked it. So he comes out underneath in that little trap door underneath the plane. And then John Cusack and Nicolas Cage have to get on the two motorcycles. That was all staged, 3 or 4 months later.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Kingdom of Dreams podcast. I'm your host, Jawad Mir. Today, I had a pleasure of speaking to a great editor who I've already had on my podcast a couple of months ago. He co-edited Bram Stoker's Dracula, which was directed by Francis Ford Coppola. And today, I spoke to him about his work on Con Air, Simon West film, which was produced by Jerry Bruckheimer, starred John Malkovich, Nicolas Cage, and John Cusack, and even Dave Chappelle in his early days. It was an amazing conversation. Glenn really dove into it and talked about so many amazing things that I did not know about. And I really hope that you enjoyed this conversation as a movie lover, as a movie buff, as a filmmaker, as a storyteller, or just as a regular audience member. Thank you so much. Enjoy this episode. Like I said, when we met, I saw it a few months ago, then I saw it again this morning, and what a great film. I mean, it still holds. Simon West did an amazing job.
He was the first time director he was in Hollywood at that time, 1997. He was given the most money any first time director had ever been given to make their first film. It was $80 million. And that was a lot back then. That's probably double. That's like getting 160 now, probably. And so it was pretty, and he was pretty ambitious because he wanted to shoot it anamorphically with anamorphic lenses. And, those cameras
Hmm.
are more bigger and unwieldy, and he had done a lot of commercials and music videos. So he's really aware of, cameras and, shooting, especially shooting commercials, you get more the commercials, especially back in those days, shot, there were more money put per second on screen than anything else in the world. So he had a lot of time where he had learned his trade well. But boy, to just all of a sudden jump onto the, huge platform of doing an action picture out in the desert with the sandstorms and the plane and the helicopter chases, all that stuff was done live. There's no and most of that stuff, there's no visual effects. Even the plane, I was noticing the plane had like that oil so one of the engines had like they put that kind of that smoke was real. And I remember that when they were flying over Vegas, which they did in that plane, people were looking up at the side going, "Oh my God, there's a plane coming down," because they had put smoke on the engine or something to make the, burn off oil on the engine to create smoke. So, and that was like that was one of those great planes that, you can drop, you know, Humvees out of with parachutes and stuff, which Michael Bay did about 10 years later in one of the Transformer movies. I forget which one. I think it was the second one.
Prob Yeah, probably the first and second because so interesting thing is so Con Air came out June 6th, 1997. The Rock came out exactly a year before that, June 6th or 7th, one of those 2 days. And Nicolas Cage being the constant. One of the great things about Con Air is so a lot of directors have tried to, sort of mimic, if you want to use the word, of Michael Bay's style, and they haven't come close to it because they're trying extra effort to do so. Simon has that element in there, like a lot of shots and the way the camera moves, but it just feels like it's his. It doesn't feel like Michael Bay's. And then the cuts, and then as you said, the sequences of the plane landing and the sandstorm, and I mean that's crazy even in today's time. I mean, they probably won't even do it in today's time with a sandstorm. They probably just
Yeah.
do VFX.
Yeah, because Simon had, it was funny. One time, Jerry Bruckheimer was in the room and he would always bring like sort of celebrities or big people in the business to kind of like, look at what his latest movie that he was doing, right? And he would bring somebody in, and I don't know who it was, but I remember him saying that he felt like Simon was shooting a classic John Ford Western type.
Mm,
And I thought, yeah, because having just worked on Michael Bay's film where, everything was swinging cameras and, you hunt for these little, in Michael's, the little chestnuts are in the camera going, shoo, and you catch it right at that moment and you go, oh, that's perfect. But the rest of it is not usable, so you have to hunt and peck through Michael's stuff to find all the right bits. And he'll do it for himself. He'll if you don't find it, he'll find it for you because that's the way he shoots it. He knows that's what you're going to get out of it. And the way Simon shot is really beautifully. It was, there's a lot of very composed
mm,
shots, just big, wide, sweeping. That's why he wanted to go anamorphic. It looked brilliant in the big screen for that. And I think that is kind of his style. And then even in the cutting is what moves it, makes it faster. And like a Michael Bay film, it's the camera going in and out, which
yeah.
is as much, motion and giving you a compelling, you know, uh, moment. But in Simon's film, it was really how he shot it and then how we cut it to create the pace. Because that's the one thing I think I learned the most on that film, and it's working with Chris Lebenzon. He came in after the when we started the director's cut. He was working on a Tim Burton movie. I think it was Mars Attacks.
Yeah.
And I remember going to see Mars Attacks like, like the week before I met Chris for the first time. Going, well, I got to go see it. And I went to a screening at the Chinese Man in on Hollywood. Because I think
Mm,
I was living in San Francisco at the time, and I think I was down here and I was staying at the Roosevelt Hotel, which was right across the street. So when I was working on Con Air, I was mostly there. And I remember saying to myself, shit, I got to go and see this, what he's done. And that was it. I went to one of the first screenings. It was a packed theater, and there was so much laughter. I thought that was going to be the biggest hit of the year if you had gone to that screening. And unfortunately, it wasn't. But, if you'd have gone to that night, you would have thought so. But Chris, anyway, came in and Steve left and Chris came in. And Chris really has a good way of picking the right pieces. Another person who was the post-production supervisor for Jerry for many years, who loved Chris and always was getting Chris on to get on the movies, even when he could only come on like on Con Air, he could only come on when the director's cut started. He said, Chris always just picks the right pieces to start with. And I always thought, yeah, that's a really, take your time when you're first looking, because in a movie like that, just even the airplane coming out of the hangar in the beginning, I remember that could have been a 2 or 3 minute sequence at one point, the way it was cut. And it was like, yeah, but it's not the movie, It's a lot of
yeah.
planes because they were all there. So there was so much beautiful film that Simon shot that it really is a matter of what I kind of call direct editing, where you get right to the point of something rather than try to just in an action picture than to set the scene too much. You just go right to the point. So it's a great when the movie really takes off in the beginning. As soon as they get on the plane, they're beginning to take out their stuff, and Pinball pulls out the thing out of his mouth, and it all happens so fast that that's what makes it so exciting. Whereas you could have spent 10 more minutes in the plane just setting the whole thing up. Even when John Cusack walks in, there was a whole long sequence with his sandals to show that he was this weird guy that wore sandals with socks, which Simon at that point being English thought that was the craziest thing you could do was to wear socks with sandals. So he had this whole sequence of him walking through it, and again, it was just one quick beat. You see it, you get it, you laugh, you move on. And that's the way the whole movie kind of got twisted and condensed down to just the bare minimum necessary to keep propelling it. Like the fight down below, with Nicolas Cage and the other guy when they're fighting over the bunny. That fight went on for could have been 2 or 3 minutes easily. And I was really surprised when I saw it again that, yeah, it's only about 30, 40 seconds. And then he hits the thing that finally, kills
Yeah.
him. But one of the things that Simon would say, and Scott Rosenberg was a brilliant writer on, I think the lines he put in there's so many great funny lines and setups. But one of the things that he did do often was he would just say, like on that scene, he'd say, Nicolas Cage and this guy get into it, and it's the greatest fight ever. And then he just leaves it for the director to figure out what that is. So, so poor Simon had to go down in the fuselage of a plane and figure out, okay, what can happen in here? There's a ramp, they're going to fight on that, but how's he going to kill him? What's going to happen? And so Simon came up with a lot of little clever ideas amongst the great material that he was given by Scott to make the film a great film.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about all these action sequences, which are great in the film. But I mean, again, watching it this morning, obviously you worked on it, but you probably would have noticed the whole idea, the way the film began with the opening credits, like it sets up, Nicolas Cage's character and how he's trying to get home to his daughter. And you see that throughout the film, like with the bunny, with the letter, and it keeps coming back. And that I feel was the thread that knotted the action sequences in a very profound and meaningful way.
Yeah, interestingly too, because they didn't have that opening in the beginning where, sort of
Mm,
the military didn't have him getting his kind of exit pay, that scene where he's out in front with all the other people and they're all saying, okay, goodbye, you come. It started with him just coming on the boat and coming home. And they felt like they needed to set up that don't leave your buddy behind thing in the military sequence in the beginning. So that was an additional shoot at near the end to make that, because again, Jerry's very good when he previews something. He really learns from the audience what isn't working that he feels needs to work, and a lot of it's usually heroic stuff or something that some tidbit of the storyline that if it's not clear, he'll want to kind of clean it up in an additional shooting thing. I mean, one interesting thing is it was a film. Well, there's two things I think is really great about the film, and one of it's, like it moved out from being like a buddy films of that earlier era. Even The Rock is essentially with Sean Connery and Nicolas Cage is a buddy film.
mm,
It has Ed Harris in there, and there's some other characters. It's really kind of a buddy film. But this one is really a broad film where they bring in great character actors. Like Steve Buscemi had just been in Fargo, and I think that's how
yes.
noted by Jerry and Simon, and they brought him in and said, "Oh, great, you can play this character." And Malkovich was, I think, always going to be that character. But like Dave Chaparral, that plays pinball. I mean, he has a great part, and nobody even knew who he was at the time. But
Yeah.
there was that kind of synergy at that time that Jerry said, let's get as many, John Cusack, as many big stars as we can in this and good actors so that we can make it a multiple, all these different storylines that kind of intersect and come together. But another thing too about it is being unique in an action picture is it kind of started I feel it did anyway, the kind of ending and then an ending and then an ending, because literally the film ended when the plane crashed and they got out and, and Poe goes up to his wife and kisses her. And that was the end of the movie. There was not that final little chase scene. I think the last scene that you would have seen,
The fire truck when John Malkovich is on the fire truck and he's being
yeah,
chased
yeah.
in the
But the last thing you were supposed to see was when the blade cuts through in an
Oh,
amazing,
right.
when the propeller cuts through the middle of
The
the
plane.
blade and splits Cyrus and Nicolas Cage up. I think he was supposed to be killed in that shot. I'm not exactly sure, but I'm pretty sure that's the last shot you see of him. And then they decided, no, it has to be another ending. And so literally they went back to Vegas and faked it. So he comes out underneath in that little trap door underneath the plane. And then John Cusack and Nicolas Cage have to get on the two motorcycles. That was all staged, 3 or 4 months later, where all of a sudden they felt like they needed yet one more ending. And now it just feels like there's five endings on a film and in these action pictures, and it's too long for me. I just can't stick
Yeah.
with. I feel that that was kind of stretch. We thought it was stretching it at the time when they went out and shot it. We were like, oh God. And of course, you're editing and you're kind of thinking, okay, we finally got this movie together. Oh no, you want to shoot another 10-minute sequence that has to be just as exciting as the last 10 minutes that you saw. So
Yeah.
that was pretty crazy to have to go and do. But again, that was the middle of the sort of 90s when they were first sort of expanding how big an action picture can be, how much money you'll spend on them. If it wasn't a James Bond movie, they didn't spend as much on those kind of movies. And that was, a very expensive movie for Disney Touchstone to do at the time.
Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned that the final sequence because I felt that that was over because in a traditional action film like when you have a scene like where a plane lands or crashes into middle of Vegas Strip like that's the climax. And then all of a sudden you see John Malkovich on top of the fire truck and I was like what just happened? It was like the anticlimax, right? And
Yeah.
it's kind of like in The Rock imagine in The Rock after those fighters,
Yes.
shoots down where Nicolas Cage was, and imagine having another ending to that. That would have killed the film because that was like a beautiful ending. I mean,
Yeah.
still Con Air was great, but it's just I felt that I'm glad you mentioned it because I felt the same way.
Yeah, it's just funny how, again, and I don't know why Jerry did that. I'll tell you an interesting story though. I was in the
Sure.
room Chris Lebenzon, and Jerry was trying to get some money out of Disney to go and shoot a bunch of stuff because he knew he needed an opening that was different than just coming off the boat and going into the bar and getting into the fight. And he knew he needed these little things, other things I can talk about. But he brought Chris and I into a room, and there was, I won't say who the head of the studio was at that time, but or head of production, but he was there. And Jerry was going through this big list of all the additional, pieces that he wanted. And he was sitting there going, okay, let's go through the list. I got Glenn and Chris in here. We'll go through the list together with you, this big producer guy from Disney, and we'll go through and we'll decide which ones we really need, right? And so the list was all Jerry's, inserts and stuff. We hadn't added anything hardly, because when you're in a big action picture, you think, oh my God, why would we need that? There's so many other holes if you want to really poke stuff at it.
Yeah.
But Jerry had his set things. And so he starts going through the list and he goes, oh, let's see. Why do we need that? He names off the first thing. We need a mid shot here, something, something. Glenn, why do we need that shot? And I was like, I just about out of my mouth said, well, you put it on the list, right? And then I realized, oh no, this is like he's playing good cop, bad cop. I'm supposed to fumble for an answer. And if it's not good enough, he's going to scratch it and say, okay, we don't need that one. And he literally did that. He literally went through this big list that he had, and he knew which ones he wanted to favor. So he didn't ask me. He would just say to himself, well, to this big producer, oh, we need this because we've got to fix this problem. Remember, we saw that in this preview. But then if there was like one that he was kind of like staging as like one of the throwaways to give this producer a bone to say, well, I went back and I got him to cut a third of his shots out. Those were the ones he would say to me or to Chris. And I kind of went afterwards, I walked out and I said to Chris, did we just get ambushed in that meeting? What was that? And he goes, yeah, that's what he does. He works it so that, makes us look like the bad guys asking for all these shots. And then he gets he reads the room. He's seeing that the producer was going, okay, no, we've got to cut more of this. That's not enough, and he kind of reads what he's going to get. But so the ending was all shot, the beginning, and also the Lerner airfield, the bit where they come, the military comes down that road with all the dead airplane parts,
Hmm.
the boneyard they call it. That was all additional shooting too, because originally it was less happened. I think what happened was, if I recall, there was some second unit stuff shot the people that were supposed to be coming, they were kind of like rednecks with like beer and guns coming out their windows and shotguns. It was really kind of it's not what Simon wanted either, because it was all second unit shooting. So they threw it all out and we tried to cut the movie without any kind of anybody coming. And so it just sort of went after Poe and John Cusack had their little meet under the airplane hangar where he beats up three guys, but one guy's still in the plane. Poe goes into the gas station, and then somehow the other guy, the drug cartel guy, runs back in, and they just take off. And then so there wasn't this other element of somebody else, danger coming at them. And so they went back and set up that whole boneyard again and came up with this idea, and again, I was sitting there going, oh God, we need to, cut more. You're so dying at that point, 8 months into cutting a movie, that you're going, oh God, do we really need that? But again, I think it's kind of fun because, it was another tricky thing for them to do, to open up all the, liquid gas, to like set up an explosion and then cut them off. And so it was just funny. And then, Simon even said, I don't even know why we're doing this joke about when they have when Cyrus lines up the different parts on the ground, and then the one tall guy goes, and he's saying, okay, we're here, the cars are coming here and the plane is here, and then this other guy goes, well, what's that? And then Cyrus goes, that's a rock, and it got a huge laugh, and I thought it was funny, but Simon he didn't even think it was funny. It was sort of like, oh, why are we doing this? And I said, well, I think that's actually funny. And I always got a big laugh in the theater. But so that was all additional shooting that was probably done in, I don't know, probably April. Like, not that, that was a fast movie that shot up until Christmas, and then had a very, very fast, furious amount of editing and visual effects work, because I was also thinking the Vegas Strip there's the plane that's flying over, where you actually in Vegas, and that's a real plane. And then there's when it starts to land, they actually built the strip on some visual effects company, I can't remember their name, built this on some sort of an airplane runway somewhere north of LA. They commandeered it for a couple months and actually built like this whole strip. And the plane was, it's probably 15 feet, it's probably 15 feet wide. And, they were real big models. That's back in the days when they used to do that kind of stuff. For the weight and for the feel of it. And when it's breaking through, different buildings all the way down, they're all, buildings that were built. But what was funny was they had a windstorm like in February, and most of it got knocked down before they shot anything. And, I remember the visual effects people going, oh my God, or the special effects people going, oh my God, what do we do? It's just all fucking come down, and we've got to rebuild it in 2 weeks. And it's taken 2 months and I was like, going, wow, where is it? And I actually went up to look at it, because when they actually were shooting some of pieces of it, because I was just so amazed to see that they had this big lumbering plane that, was on these pulleys, and they were doing all this stuff practically. And it was pretty cool. I thought that added to it. The only thing that was done in Vegas besides flying over it, they did crash into that actual casino, because they were going to tear that casino down. And so they were allowing him before they started to do the demolition, they allowed him to crash into that kind of entrance area. And I can remember sitting there one night with Simon, because we got pretty friendly, because we were, back in those days, you sent a director something every couple of days, what you've been cutting. So I'd gotten to know him during the shoot really well. And so by that time, they were having us come out to show him stuff and to make sure he had all the pieces that he needed at this thing. So I'd cut something, and then I'd fly out in the evening and then show him the next, that evening or the next, because they were doing night shoots. And the next morning I'd fly back and then cut. And then 2 days later, fly back and show him more stuff. And at one point I was sitting there watching them try to take this plane, and it goes over, you can see it too, it goes over water. There's a water feature out in front of the lobby, and it kind
Mm-hmm.
of, they had a pulley that was a big, airplane wire, I don't know what kind of thing, that pulls airplanes around. And it had a big pulley system so that a truck was going the opposite way of the plane. So as the idea was this they oversold it to Simon, because he's sitting there telling me they say it's going to go 40 miles, when, because he really wanted to be fast when it hit into there. If they say it's going to go, I don't know, 25, 30, I forget what he said, but fairly fast. And I looked at it and I saw this setup, and I'm going, how is this truck that's like it was like a dump truck or something, is going to go fast enough this way to pull this plane, which was only about 30, 40 feet from where it was going to end up. How was it going to get the momentum to get up to that speed? And it's kind of, we ended up having, it went about 5 miles an hour when it actually did it. Five, maybe 10 at the most. So we had to speed stuff up. And there's a lot of,
Yeah.
to see what he really wanted was like one kind of shot that showed you going over the water feature and just right into it. But it turned out to be quite a few shots to make it kind of work. But, again, that's what I thought was at that time when I was just sort of getting into the real Hollywood movie business. It was cool to see big practical stuff done practically. And now I don't think anybody would ever do that. Now they just say, oh, it's CG, the whole thing.
Yeah. Well, which is interesting you say that, because when the plane comes into Vegas and you see the stratosphere and the whole city, but then there's that shot with a shot upwards of that. I mean, normally I would think it's like a hard rock guitar, hard
It
rock.
is hard rock. Hard rock had just
Right,
come out. And that was the
right.
guitar.
Yeah, and then it hit the guitar, and I'm thinking in my head, because it looked so real, that they actually did that. And then the whole thing, there's some small elements which look like when the plane was about to land that you could maybe figure out that it's not 100% authentic in terms of the real size plane. But yeah, when it's going and into the lobby and hits the Corvette, I think it was, or a Porsche, I forget. I mean, that just looked crazy. It just looked, even watching it on I have an anamorphic monitor,
Oh, right.
32-inch, and just watching it on that, it's just so, I can't even explain to you. I mean, it's just amazing.
That the Hard Rock, that was a prop. Again, that was part of this street that they built. So, that guitar was probably, at least 8 feet tall. It was pretty good size for the
Yeah.
plane. It came in and crashed into it. And all that's the scale. I forget what they called it. Maybe they called it, 1/10 scale, but it was bigger than anything I had ever like seen built, for a visual effects thing. I mean, there's just one funny shot when they went back in to shoot the boneyard, and that that the setup where they have all the explosions, and they're fighting the soldiers that come down. They also had they had the car there again, because Simon wanted to reshoot the car coming in, because they had to go down that they had to set up the boneyard,
Mm.
get the Corvette back out, have it drive down that road, so you tie it all in. And just one little shot, because this was Simon, it was classic Simon. He goes, I want we want to reveal it by a boot that comes out. And so you go behind this old beat up boot, and then you see the car. It didn't end up that way, because Jerry wanted to come down the boneyard first. So you really established the boneyard. So you got the
Yeah.
set, but you can still see that shot. It's a backup shot now. Whereas I remember it, at first it was supposed to be you pan off this boot and you'd come out and you'd see the car coming towards you. In the end, it's kind of a backup shot where he decides he's going to go into this little shed to hide the car. So it's a backup shot, but you see that boot. Well, that boot, he brought that in because I said, "Oh, that's really cool. How'd you get such a cool shot with the boots in focus?" And he goes, "It's a big boot." And I said, "Really?" And he brought it in, and the boot was like this big. It was,
Oh, wow.
yeah, to get that shot right, get everything in perspective, and he was really good at that. And I think it was some of his commercial training, because he had one of the things had won Clio's for at the time was the original Bud Frog commercials. You may not be old enough to know, but originally in the early 90s, they Budweiser made a frog that would go Bud.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
I know what you're talking about. I've seen those. Yeah.
he cut he shot those. Those are, and again, those are
Oh.
all, again, on a big miniature set, essentially. It's you think it's you might, oh, could you do it on something the table size? No, that was like a huge, in a stage, that was a huge room that they built that. So he was good at the perspective and knowing, what you could shoot and how you would need to get it on. So pretty amazing. He had a great eye. I always thought Simon had a great eye. Always knew where he wanted the camera to be, and it was difficult inside the plane. They shot the plane in Hollywood, the interior
Mm,
stuff of the plane that was shot on Stewart Street in Hollywood, and
right.
we were cutting right by there. So I would go down every morning just to say hi to him, see what's going on. And I remember one day in there, I think they were trying to do pinballs thing, and just getting a camera down underneath. They keep cutting out places because originally it was a real plane there, but they had to keep cutting out pieces of it in order to push the camera down far enough. So with the big anamorphic lens, which is like this big, you could actually
Yeah.
get the shot that he wanted. It was difficult. And also in the Corvette, getting shots of John Cusack, very difficult. So that's why you went a little bit over. I think that's one of the things that was hard for the studio to swallow is, all action pictures you go over. And in this case, they went over a couple weeks of shooting just because of how hard it was to get not only all those actors together, but they also had to do their little ad libs. And this was another interesting thing that I learned on that movie was there were a lot of good actors with good ad libs. There, Steve Buscemi's a fabulous ad libber. John Cusack had a bunch of ad libs that he added throughout the movie. I don't think I think that was and Pinball had a bunch of stuff. They all had like their things. Um, Malkovich didn't. I think Malkovich pretty much he performed what was there because he knew that's what you wanted and you needed. But everybody else was throwing in stuff. But as you edited through it, you almost threw out everything that was an ad lib because
Mm,
when you really get down, the ad libs are funny on the day and everybody thinks they're funnier than the script because they've they've been shooting the script for, half a day or whatever. And then all of a sudden they go, okay, let me do a few ad libs. And then everyone does the ad libs and they go, oh, that's even funnier than the script. Well, it's not in the end. And you have to get rid of all those. And it's hard. And John Cusack came in to see the film. And because the actors always get a chance to see a film before they have to loop.
yeah.
Jerry's always holding him back when I worked for him anyway. I don't know how he does now, but he was always trying to not let him see it because he didn't want to lose them in case they didn't like anything or something. And
Yeah.
so finally he's got to show John Cusack is going to come in and loop. And John comes in and goes, "Where are all my ad libs?" to Jerry. And Jerry goes, "I don't know what ad libs. Did the editors miss your great ad libs?" Again throwing us under the bus. And he goes, yeah, he missed them all. And he goes, well, look, we'll give you, and he literally gave John Cusack a set of dailies. I think we had to like have an assistant go through for 2 days and pull out everything that John Cusack shot and gave him a chance to write these elaborate notes. And he had his spreadsheet and he had all these notes for us. And it was like, oh my God. And I just remember getting this big, bank of notes, a big book, and going, oh my God, he's gone through every scene and he's added every little ad lib he's ever done on this movie. And we've cut them all out. And so Jerry said, well, just try a few, and so I tried a few and we showed it to him. He goes, oh, that sucks. That sucks. Get rid of that. Get rid of that. We can't have that in there. And I said, well, Jerry, these are all of the ones that he's saying are we think are the best ones of all the ones he's done. He goes, well, we can't do them. We won't do any of them. So literally it was like a thing for poor John to go through and find all this great stuff. And then none of it was in, again, because of the time. And you just find that, in most cases, what was in the script was what you need because it tells more stories than one. Like Buscemi's line about the band, playing this song of I mean, what better line could you have than that, right?
Yeah.
The band playing the song that they killed in a plane crash. It was just like, so there were just genius lines that Scott Rosenberg had in the script. He was a very good writer, especially of the sort of comic, but personality elements that he gave each character. So they had a funny line, but it also showed their personality. And he was a good writer for that. And so literally we had to go through and cut out most of everybody's ad libs. The funny scene in the scene with Buscemi and the little girl
Hmm.
screamed it. We had one public, sort of preview screening. And again, it was for Jerry to be able to then go back to the studio and say, we need another $5 million to fix all this and this and this. And so when we screened it, I will say this, Michael Eisner, who was running the studio at the time, was sitting literally right in front of I was sitting with Chris, and we had the post-production supervisor who was an ex-Disney employee was sitting with us, and we were sort of, we had the dial where you're, for the sound, because we learn you don't give it to the director, because as soon as the director has it, it's up to 10 for the whole movie, right? And
Mm.
so I had it, or Chris and I were both had it. Anyway, we're sitting there, and Michael Eisner is in a reserve seat, is sitting right in front of us with his wife. And when that scene started to come on, I didn't really notice it, but the post-production supervisor who knew the whole Disney thing kept looking at the wife going, oh no, oh no, this scene's going to get so cut down, because she's just, freaking out about what's going to happen to the little girl, right? And Jerry always wants to make sure that, women want to come to his movies. He never makes them so, hard-edged that, he loses that audience. He wants to make it a date film. So, sure enough, as soon as the screening was over, the post-production supervisor looked at me and went, oh my God, we're going to have to hack out most of that Buscemi scene, because everybody in the audience is just thinking, for the rest of Lerner Airfield, what happened to that little girl? What's going to
Yep.
happen? And there was a whole bit longer. And so interesting, when I watched it this time, I was surprised that we had still left. There's like 4 beats that you go to her and him. The setup, then they sit down, they have tea, or and then they start to sing the song, and then he leaves, and you wonder what happens, and then you see her. So there's like 5 beats in there to create that little thing. And I think there were 5 beats in her. They were just longer, like the tea scene, just when they're sipping tea. It just goes. It was just because Steve would say these funny things to her, and and it was great. It was really funny, but you just realize, no, you can only stay on that scene the least amount rather than the most amount. And in general, that's what I learned from that movie and doing action pictures, is that, funny enough, it says you want to get through an action scene kind of as fast as you can, getting all the great shots in, as opposed to double cutting it and doing things that, when you're an independent filmmaker and world, you take one shot and you cut it 4 times into the thing. You don't do that in a big action picture like that. You lose each shot once and only go back to it if you absolutely don't have another angle to show the next beat. Would you ever use something twice? And that's why it makes it ferocious feeling, because you realize you have all these, even as a viewer, you see all these great shots that are showing all this great action, but you never get bored, because it's always a new angle showing the next beat. And
Yeah.
that's another kind of one of my, I kind of learned again on that movie, was I called it beats per minute. And I realized that the faster you get through beats per minute, the more exciting the movie is. I think Chris Nolan says it's like falling forward. I think I heard him say that
Yeah.
once about that, where he said, yeah, you want to feel like you're stumbling forward, that you don't hang on any shot long enough in action sequence. So to really get a handle on what's going on, you want to keep stumbling forward through the sequence to kind of go, whoa, whoa, whoa. And I call it beats per minute, that you want to have enough beats per minute in there that nothing languishes, but just keeps driving forward. And because I was surprised, 40 minutes in and you're in learner, they're doing the exchange, and Steve Buscemi comes on in 40 minutes. And there's a lot that goes on in that pre-40 minutes to get to that
Yeah.
point. Appears, and then all hell breaks loose. But
Yeah. And sort of talking about three things, and one being that scene with the little girl, I genuinely feel when I was watching it, even though I had seen it a couple of months ago, like I was still concerned for the safety of the girl when you see the broken cup, right?
Yep.
And then there's all this stuff happens, and you forget about it, and then you see her running when the plane takes off, and you have this relief. Because I think that is in the entire film, that entire tension with Steve Buscemi's character, because he's one of those characters that is literally a butcher. The way you guys crafted that, oh man, it's just amazing. Like I think that stood out for me the most. The tension and like not knowing what happened to her, but as soon as you see her, like, oh, she's fine, and that
Yeah.
relatability and that empathy really connects. And another thing that we didn't talk about, and it's
Where
probably the most
the
under.
that plane is flying over her too. That's not again not
Yeah, yeah, not
real.
VFX.
Yeah.
The underrated thing about this film is a score by Mark Mancina and Trevor Rabin. Amazing score. I've spoken to Mark Mancina a couple of times, and he had a story about Jerry Bruckheimer when he was working on Bad Boys. How he just comes and sits with a newspaper and he just like tries to like, doesn't bother you, but he will listen to it like, okay, that's garbage and that's garbage. But what a great score, and it really plays into the film's narrative really, really well.
Yeah, we had heavy metal music in there because that's the flavor that they wanted. That's like partly why they brought Trevor in because he
Yeah.
was like a lead guitarist and he was in Yes, the later renditions of the band Yes, and co-wrote one of their big hits in the 80s, which was called Owner of a Lonely Heart. So he had been like a big rock star in, I think, South Africa, and then it joined Yes. And then he was in Hollywood, and I think he was sort of hanging out with Hans Zimmer, if I recall. He might have been set up by Hans. Hans brought him over for something. And so when Jerry said this had to have a real heavy metal score, he wanted to bring a guitarist in to kind of give that, heavy metal rock sound, which Trevor does really well. But together, those two also brought in all those crushing as
Yeah,
rhythm
yeah,
pretty early on in that era of trying to blend sound effects with music. A lot of that is them. The sound effects guy, too, I forget his name now, did a really great job, though, of making all of the sounds of the airplane and all of the things. But there's some musical elements of a kind of a pounding, almost 9 Inch Nails sound of a
yeah.
that's part of the sound, the music track, which
It's
is
a
pretty.
very it's a very unique track, and I was reading. It's kind of like off topic. I was reading. I don't know how much truth there is to it, but I was reading some fun facts about Con Air. Um, One of them was funny. The other one was sad. I'll talk about the funny one. That how in France they had to rename the film to The Wings of Hell because con in French means apparently dumb. I don't know.
Yeah.
But so Wings of Hell, like I mean, that's an interesting name. But also, one thing that I read, and you can correct me, if this is not correct. There was a individual name. I think he was a welder. His name was Phil Schwartz. He has a model of an airplane fall on him, and he passed away. Is that accurate information story?
That may be. I'm not entirely couldn't verify that.
Okay, we'll leave it at that then. We will consider it as not verifiable. So I just read it somewhere, and it was kind of sad to read
True.
that.
There's sad things that can happen on a big movie like that when again when everything is practical. I
Yeah,
mean, watching that plane go crashing into the entranceway of that Vegas building was pretty crazy. I mean, once it started to move, you didn't know what was going to. I think the first time if I recall, I think the cable actually broke. So it got about halfway through that water feature, and then it was stuck in the water feature, and then they had to rehook it up again to get it to go the rest of the way. So I mean, but when that thing broke, it flew, right? And it would have flown around the pulley and come out the other side, and the truck would have gone, whoa, anything, So there's it's a dangerous business.
yeah,
So
and
I know
it's just yeah, no, I agree. And one of the things, just to wrap it up, the fact that it ended in that Vegas strip, had it been some other city, I mean, maybe New York would have probably had a similar effect, like Manhattan, but it just wouldn't have that same effect to have it land in the city of lights and, gambling and all that, which, everybody goes through and it's like everybody's up until like God knows when, 5 a.m., 4 a.m. But just to see that, it was a very starking contrast to how the place is versus what happened. And I thought that was really well, if it was written in the script, that's fabulous.
Yeah, no, it really well done. And again, like I said, that blending, really large practical model work with, the real thing and flying it around the scene. So you had these great shots of it at sunset, pretty amazing. And the stuff in the Grand Canyon also was pretty hairy because those are three helicopters. It's all live. They're all
Yeah,
flying. You know, Malkovich is really there, at the back of the plane with that thing open. I think he has like, obviously
a
has rope
harness on. Yeah,
is he's there. So I mean, it's phenomenal, and just all of the way the helicopters were flying all around. There's a lot of footage. Again, it had to be all truncated to get to the real beats and the keep the momentum going. But you could have cut a 10-minute sequence just of all of the maneuverings all those planes did, and of course a lot of the shots were added, but the actual vehicles flying around are all real. And that
yeah,
plane really went through a lot of locations and had to fly around quite a bit. It was a real thing to get that plane up, if I recall, just working and making sure it was going to fly and do all that it needed to do. Pretty
yeah.
great.
No,
And again,
amazing.
I think also that Scott did a really good job was working out the mechanics of, you know, what the transponder, how they were going to fake the other guys to follow somebody else, and do it in a really fun way with Pinball going and talking to the girl, and and just he had good character beats for every plot point that needed to be done. So I just think in that sense, it's a it's a master class of how to write an action picture to have it all kind of work out and be, I mean, like the Steve Buscemi character never touches anybody, right? And yet
Yeah,
he's the menacing guy in the whole thing. And yet all he did was just the way he appeared in that outfit and the way he was set up. You think, oh my God, but he doesn't do anything to anybody the whole time. And the end, it's very funny because that was an additional shoot too. When they went back to Vegas, they brought Steve back they said, oh, because you didn't really see what happened to Steve. So they said, oh, let's have him pretend like he's now playing, not slot machines, roulette, right? And so that's just a great little moment. And that actually is Scott Rosenberg, who's the dealer, who's saying, okay, who's betting? Who's betting?
oh,
That's him. They brought him in just for a little cameo. So that's a funny little,
that's cool. That's
yeah.
so cool. That's incredible. Glenn, listen, this is, as usual, amazing set of stories. I'm glad that you shared so much information. Wonderful film. And again, it's like one of those, that movie, I even remember when it came out, Con Air and The Rock, a year apart, are probably two of the most best action movies in a top 10 in my view, because nowadays the action movies that are made, they don't have that heart. They don't have that, that every character, I mean, they do, but not that effectively, that every character has a goal, you know,
Yes.
to be where they want to be. And it's missing from nowadays movies. So I really enjoyed Con Air again, watching it after a couple of months and then after a lot of years.
Yeah. Well, cool. Well,
Hey.
it's always nice to talk to you.
Awesome. Would love to do another one whenever you're ready for another episode or
Hey,
anything that you want to chat.
are you a Tom Waits fan at all?
What has he done?
Singer, songwriter?
Oh no, but I would love to. I mean, I can well bring myself up to speed to him.
If that's the film that was the first film ever digitally cut on video in 1987. That's the
What's
one of
the
my
what's the name of the film?
big time, and it's a concert feature of Tom Waits, the singer-songwriter. Yeah,
Okay, I'll take a look at it. I mean, I'll definitely watch it and we can chat about that. I'm always interested in new stuff, so that's awesome.
all right. Well, nice to talking to you as always.
Thank you, Glenn. Have a good one.